The Conquest of Canaan may be the most difficult part of the Bible for modern readers. Some people wonder, how could I embrace the Christian God if he commanded his followers to devote entire people groups to complete destruction without mercy? Those of us who are followers of Christ should take all concerns about evil and violence seriously. But what if the conquest of Canaan, when it's understood in context, is part of how God himself is opposing evil and violence? Seeing an event in context can give different perspective. For example, if you only watch the destruction of the Death Star in Star Wars: A New Hope, it might look like genocide. You might wonder, why are they killing all these people? But if you watch the entire movie, it looks very different. Similarly, we can get fresh perspective about the conquest of Canaan by considering first, literary context, and second, historical context. Literary context simply means paying attention to how language works. Many scholars believe that biblical language about the destruction of the Canaanites involves ancient warfare rhetoric, which employed hyperbole in various ways. Thus, interpreted accurately, the Bible is not describing genocide or the wanton destruction of non-combatants. In other words, when we read these stories, we shouldn't envision the Israelites sweeping through residential areas to kill women and children. Rather, these passages are describing a decisive military victory in the ordinary language of the day. There are at least 5 reasons to take this proposal seriously. First, warfare rhetoric is very common in the ancient world. Very frequently, language of total destruction or total annihilation is used to describe a decisive military victory, even in situations where we know that literally every person wasn't killed. We even find foreign powers using this language to describe Israel's destruction, yet obviously we know that not every Israelite was killed. Second, the same language of total destruction is used in the Bible to describe the Babylonian exile. But obviously we know that this event didn't kill all the Israelites. Third, interwoven with the command to destroy the Canaanites is a command not to intermarry with them. Similarly, the conquest is also described as a driving out and dispossession. But why would intermarriage be a temptation if everyone is supposed to die? And who would there be to drive out? Fourth, repeatedly throughout Joshua and Judges, those utterly destroyed are still around in the later narrative. Even in specific cities, we're repeatedly told that there are no survivors, but then we find there are survivors. This applies even when we have merisms like man and woman, old and young. And it's also true for the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, who are completely destroyed, but then keep popping up over and over. This doesn't mean the Bible has errors. It simply means we're trying to interpret its language in the way it uses it. Fifth, scholars like Richard Hess have argued that the Canaanite cities targeted in Joshua 9 through 11 are not primarily residential centers, but military garrisons. Thus, they wouldn't be targeting the civilian population at large by attacking them, any more than the Allied soldiers would be killing every single person in Germany when they're advancing through Nazi territory at the end of World War II. Again, the language of complete annihilation is describing the results of a total victory and an overturning of power. You can see a fuller case for each of these points in my longer video on this topic, but please understand this does not completely answer the question. This just helps us properly frame the question. We still need to ask, even if these wars were not targeted against non-combatants, how is it okay to invade another country and kill people? This is where historical context can help. We have to remember that the ancient world was a brutal place. There was no UN, no police, and no restraint to human cruelty. In the Old Testament law, we find warnings against the Canaanite practices of bestiality and child sacrifice by fire. The biblical rationale for the conquest of Canaan is not greed or vengeance or xenophobia. This is a weaker nation attacking a stronger one, and the stated purpose in the text is the judgment of evil. There's a significant moral difference between violence in general and violence inflicted within the framework of punishment for wrongdoing. For example, if your neighbor imprisons you in their house, that's wrong. But if a judge sentences you to prison, that is entirely different. This is the ultimate explanation for the conquest of Canaan, the reality of divine judgment. To To put it as simply as we can, God is the creator and moral governor of the entire world. He has the right to intervene and put an end to oppression and violence. This judgment was not a knee-jerk reaction, but the response to an accumulation of evil and lack of repentance over centuries. Nor is it an ongoing paradigm for other violent acts. It was a unique event in world history for judging evil, but also for advancing redemptive purposes through the nation of Israel and her coming Messiah. Ultimately, God's judgment is a good thing. Where would the world be if God didn't intervene to stop evil? How could we trust a God who doesn't do anything about the burning of infants? But the amazing thing about the Bible is that God is also merciful. And in this light, perhaps the most interesting character in the story of the Conquest of Canaan is Rahab the prostitute, because her story highlights that no one need suffer God's judgment. God is eager to make peace with anyone who desires friendship with Him. This is the message of the whole Bible, of which Joshua is just one part. In the person of Christ, God actually took judgment onto Himself so that we could be freely forgiven while He still upholds the demands of justice. If God is like that, we should not hesitate to ask for His mercy in our lives, and we should do everything in our power to stand against violence and injustice in the world today.